Video is to show how to use Excel to create a scatter plot. So again, we have our trial data file open and we're on the trial data tab. So we're going to be looking at some time speed data. So we would like to make a scatter plot of a dependent variable and an independent variable. Here, let's say that the speed is dependent on the time. So this would be our y variable or along our vertical axis, and this would be our x variable or along our horizontal axis. We have to be careful in how we choose our data to make sure that it ends up on the correct axes. So we're going to click in the middle of the time cell and we'll drag down to highlight all of our time data. It's important to note, if you're making a scatter plot, you need to have as many entries on your x values as you do on your y values. Otherwise, it will result in an error. Then we're going to highlight our dependent variable. So before we click in speed and scroll down, we're going to hold on to the command button on a Mac. On a PC, it would be the either the shift or the control button. I'm not sure which. I think it's probably the control button. But we'll hold down command on a Mac and click and drag. And now we have our column A being selected first and our column B being selected second. We'll go to our home and we'll choose to insert a graph. So from the Insert tab, we're going to select a scatter plot. So there's a variety of different charts here, but it does make the best sense to choose just an empty scatter. So we're going to choose an empty scatter and we'll see our graph. You'll notice along our horizontal axis, we have our time, and along our vertical axis, we have our speed. And we have a title for speed. We can go ahead and change some of these features for this. So if I'm in here and I want to add axes, I can go to Add Chart Element, and I can add axes titles. So I'm going to add a primary horizontal title. That's going to be the time in seconds. Then I'm going to add another chart element. I'm going to add a primary vertical title. That's going to be the speed in meters per second. And it's a good idea to get used to using the units when you're typing in your scales. Now I'm going to modify the title. So if I already have a box that's open and I want to modify it, I can double click on it and it'll bring up the text editor, and I can go in and change this to speed versus time. Now I've got a pretty good graph here. Now suppose I wanted to have my graph end at 2. I didn't want the axes to go all the way to 2.5. I can modify that axis by clicking on the axes, and you'll notice it has a box around it. And I can right click on it and go to, clicking on it, and right click on it and go to Format Axes. So it'll pull up my Format Axes options on the side, and I can change my bounds. So I can set my minimum bound, my maximum bound, and change my units. The units are where those bars are. So I have units, my major unit at 0.5. So every 0.5, I'm going to have a vertical line. Now I'm going to change it so that it only goes up to 2, not to 2.5. And I'm going to change my major units to be every 0.25. So that way I have perhaps a little bit more of large units being shown. So it should show some more clicks once I click out of that. Should see how my grid gets a little bit more dense. So modifying these things will change how where your graph is centered in the graphing window and also how those lines appear. Now that's for the horizontal axis. If I have this already open and I click on the vertical axis, I should be able to modify it as well. And so I'm going to go to right click on it and go to Format Axis, and it will bring up those bounds, and maybe I'll only have it go up to 10 because that's my maximum that I have, and I'll make my major unit going up by 1s instead of going up by 10s, or going up by 2s. And so now you can see I've got my graph here for speed to speed versus time. It's important to be able to modify your axes so that way if you have to extrapolate after the data or before the data, you can have room on your grid to be able to draw that in.